Hello and welcome to the Ashcan Edition on Graphic Policy TV. I'm Brant Lewis, and I'm very excited about going to New Genesis for today's episode. Today I'm joined by Rob V, who is the writer of the upcoming New Gods, along with artist Evan Coggle. Rob, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you're having a good Sunday.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And yeah, it's already holiday season here, so we're getting into the mood. I've got family visiting downstairs, but happy to be here for call.
Love to hear it. I'd say perfect time to be talking about a entire family of characters and ensemble as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of the joy of writing New Gods for me was that I could take on this kind of cast and have a large group of characters with their own motivations and their own sort of internal tensions, if you will.
So, Rob, usually when I start off with the show, I like to begin with a couple of little interview questions, get to know you, if that's fine.
Hmm. Yeah, go for it.
So, if you were trapped on a deserted island and you could only bring one music album with you, what would it be and why?
It would probably be Tool's Lateralis because it's my most listened to album ever. Um, I don't know. I just keep going back to that album and I I enjoy it. I love it. I've been a big fan of Tool for a while and um, I love their kind of music. So that would be it.
Love to hear it. I'm going to be honest. I did not strike you as a Tool fan.
Oh yeah. I've been a huge Tool fan. I think there were issues of Swamp Thing named after Tool songs. There's issues of an upcoming book also named after Tool songs. So, yeah, yeah.
So, what's an underrated comic that you feel that more people should know about?
Mm, I don't know. There are so many. I feel like more people should know Breccia's work. I feel like more people should know Sergio Topi's work. Um, Amongst my contemporaries, I feel like yeah, more people should read stuff that Denise Campbell was doing before he burst onto the scene with Ultimates, 20th Century Man, and Agents of World. Um, Dan Waters has created her own stuff. Coffin Bound is a particular highlight. I wrote the intro for it. So yeah,
Very solid picks. I love Denise. I love Dan. They're doing some of the best work in comics at the moment.
yeah.
So, what made you want to pursue a career in comics?
I didn't actually start off wanting to pursue a career in comics. I just wanted to write, and I think that stays true to this day. I've had a love of writing since I was 12 or 13. And so I didn't actually pursue that as a career. I studied chemical engineering and worked as a chemical engineer for a few years. And then 2013, I decided I'd had a few things published as an amateur, so I decided to dive in with both feet. And yeah, it just so happened that one of my writing endeavors, having sort of read and loved most of 80s Vertigo, one of my writing endeavors was to create a graphic novel called Black Mamba. And we did that through Kickstarter and it did really well. And yeah, it opened a lot of doors for me. So my career writing comics kind of just burgeoned out from that.
That's very fascinating. I can definitely see your history of being a chemical engineer in series like Swamp Thing, which obviously deals with the environment, even with some like the many deaths of Layla Starr as well.
Mhm. Yeah. I think you know you could look at that as I question sometimes if I wasted time doing something I didn't really want to do. But then I wouldn't be the writer I am if I hadn't spent those years studying engineering like I did. Even if I don't use the engineering bit as much, but certainly the experiences, the friends I made, the trouble I got into when I was there, all of those things. Yeah, all of those things contribute to your writing.
So now moving on to New Gods, let's talk a little bit about your history with the Fourth World and Jack Kirby.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't. I wasn't one of those sort of really original Kirby heads or anything, if you will. Um, I discovered the fourth world because I read in an interview somewhere that Alan Moore um, had gotten excited about comics because he saw what Jack Kirby was doing, and he found that quite inspiring, if you will. And so I said, well, if it inspired Alan Moore, it must be worth a read. And so I started reading the fourth world, and I can see why a writer of that stature and capability would look at this work and have their brains kind of exploded, because I think Kirby's ideas, they literally spilled out of his head onto the page. It was just unfiltered creativity, and that kind of stuff can be very inspiring to someone, because there are a million ideas on a page that you could take and say, I'm gonna take this one idea and turn it into a whole story. When you have something like that, when there's something so creatively rich, I think you can't help being excited by it. So ever since I read The Fourth World, which was a few years ago, um, yeah, I wanted to dive into that territory. I mean, more than anything else, though, the thing that got me really excited about writing New Gods was that nobody else was using these characters. It was a whole universe of characters just kind of sat on the sidelines, not doing anything. And so, um, yeah, I felt like that would be a good place to go after Detective.
I agree with that because I always find it so fascinating that you have this whole rich universe of characters and ideas and concepts, and the fact that I think a lot of people will just feel so daunted by that Kirby legacy and also what they bring to the table. So I'm very excited the fact that you keep saying that you were not afraid about tackling that.
Yeah, I mean, nothing about writing ever makes me afraid, no matter what I'm writing, who I'm writing for. Um, I have zero intimidation when it comes to writing, because it's something I fundamentally enjoy doing. And you can't be scared of something that you love doing. So yeah, whether it was taking on Detective, that the comic that the company's named after, or kind of doing a complete reinvention on New Gods, or taking up Swamp Thing after the sort of generational great writers that have been on that book in the past. So
I would love to hear a bit more about how you came onto the New Gods title, especially after doing Detective Comics and now DC doing All In. What was kind of the plan or the idea about bringing the Fourth World back to the center of the DC universe?
yeah, I mean, I actually had the idea long before any of the All In or Absolute stuff had come in. Um, it was during my time on Detective. My editor in chief said, "What do you want to do next when your detective run is done?" And yeah, I had this moment of thinking that, well, the only place to go after doing a detective run is to do even bigger books. Maybe a Superman title, maybe a Batman title. That's one way you could go. And if you're not really sort of hankering to do that, the other way to go is to say, great, give me something that hasn't had a book in a while, and let me see if I can sort of reinvigorate, restart, reinvent some of it. And so, but I didn't want to do something that felt small, because sometimes, you can take a character, an obscure one that no one knows, and reinvent it and do well, but it still feels small, feels intimate in that way. I wanted to do something that felt like an epic reinvention, if you will, and New God seemed to be perfect for it.
I love to hear that. I think that is such a great time as well because the whole thing with the All In is the fact that Darkseid is gone, the Omega, the Tiger Force, the fact that literally the quote unquote old god has died, much like the beginning of the original series, and
Sure.
now they have to tackle that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think Darkseid's death is mentioned on page one of the New Gods issue 1. So, yeah, I mean, he's such a pillar of reality in the DCU. He's the boogeyman. He's the evil that lurks outside beyond all darkness. And so to have that pillar be taken away kind of upsets the balance of uh, good and evil in this corner of the cosmos. Obviously, that means something for Highfather, who has always seen himself in opposition to Darkseid, and so Highfather sort of starts to question his place in the grand scheme of things. And I think we also account for um, villains who are perhaps staying away from this corner of the cosmos because Darkseid was there. And now that he is absent, they feel emboldened to step in. And so, yeah, we see everything that stems from Darkseid's sort of death is um, strewn throughout the pages of this New Gods run.
Yeah, and I think that's very fascinating about the idea of bringing up High Father, the fact that New Genesis and Apocalypse stand in opposition to each other. It's almost the equivalent of what happens to the quote unquote God when the devil is no longer there. You no longer have that great evil, especially for Orion, who was fated to kill Darkseid. What does that mean for him?
Yeah, and I think those are questions we get into the story. So I'm aware of not wanting to spoil it, but um, yeah, certainly I like to think of her. I mean, Orion's often been portrayed as this kind of brutish, um, action-packed, punch first, ask questions later kind of character. Um, and I thought to myself, what if that was how he behaved because that's what everyone expects him to be? Um, yes, he has been raised on New Genesis, but everyone expects him to be Darkseid's son. And so the expectation, the intimidation is that he is Darkseid's son. And Orion simply sort of plays up to that, if you will. Um, but then that's also tragic. Tragedy for a character who might be more nuanced than we think, might have more feelings than we consider. Um, to know that, yeah, every time he walks into a room in New Genesis, he knows what everyone else is thinking. Everyone else is going, "Oh, that's Darkseid's son." So, yeah,
Yeah, and I do really love Orion's character because I think he so often gets the short end of the stick compared to Scott, who I also love a lot too. But I
sure.
feel like with Orion, like you mentioned, it's really easy to present him as a warrior, but he is like, if you read the original comics, he's a pretty normal guy most of the time.
Sure, yeah, but you can't just. I feel like the original comics have a tone and tenor that you can't just replicate. So I can see why. Um, otherwise you would sound dated, and you can see why Orion's kind of fallen into that trap of like being the warrior, and the warrior must be tough, and the warrior cannot have emotions. I don't think Kirby intended for him to be that kind of character, as you say, and I think part of the joy of writing him in this series is being able to say, okay, cool, let's not treat him like that character, but let's not take away the fact that he's an utter badass as well. So I think I'm quite excited for people to see what we do with it.
So let's talk about the other ensemble characters of the piece, Scott and Barta, who I would say are probably the most breakout characters of the Fourth World. What are they doing now?
Well, they've had a baby in the book, and we addressed that in issue one. They've had a daughter called Olivia Free, and Scott is now faced with the questions of can he be a good father, never having known what it's like to have a good father. And so, as he ponders that question, the greater schemes and machinations of other people force him into an adventure that might make him choose between being a good father and being a good hero. And what is that like? What is that struggle like? Is an interesting angle for him. With Barda, she is kind of his pillar, if you will, for me. Um, she is the voice of his um, I don't want to say inner consciousness. She's the voice of his inner reason, if you will. Because he can Scott's character is kind of interesting. He can tend to be navel gazing. He can tend to be a little inward looking, um, and so maybe he ponders things a bit too much. Where Barda's just like, no, I'm just going to come in and punch this. So yeah,
Yeah. And they are one of the best relationships in comics, find that they pair each other so well. I think that's very interesting about them having a daughter because it's very much reflective of that idea of the fourth world itself, this generational conflict and trauma, replicating and almost trying to break out of that cycle.
yeah, and I said very early on this series was about fatherhood in some ways, and you can see that already the seeds of that planted in the Pact and Kirby's run, with what happens to Scott Free and Orion, and yeah, I didn't want to. I saw so many books after that Kirby run had kind of rehashed the same plot from the Pact, and yeah, it's great to investigate the characters, but I feel like if you interrogate them with the same question the fifth time in a row, you're kind of belaboring the point. And so um, the thing I did was to say, okay, how can we do a completely different conflict that reflects on what happened to these characters because of that pact? And so it's not just Orion and Scott Free. I think the events of this book will make everyone, including Highfather, including Scott Free, including Barda, including Orion, all of them reflect on their own origins and where they came from and the choices that they will have to make for where they're going.
If you don't mind me asking, I know that you are a father and have a kid. When do you bring your own experiences to the series with these characters?
I mean, I think you bring some of yourself to every character, right? The way to write someone as a recognizably empathetic human character is to find parts of yourself that you can supplant into them. And I think every father at some point questions like, am I ready for this? Can I raise another good human being? Um, and I think having that doubt slash fear is natural, but also a lovely part of having to grow up. And I think grown up though he is, Scott's going to have to do that growing up, and because he's a god, and because of his history, and because of the pact, I think those questions become so much more heightened and so much more dramatic that it's kind of fun to write them. But I know that the underlying emotional conflicts and questions come from me essentially.
Let's talk a little bit more. Let's talk a little bit more about mythology, because obviously, in your past works, Made Dead Slay the Star, Rare Flavors, you have discussed mythology and very much have done these stories of gods and humans interacting on this very personal scale.
Yeah.
Did you want to bring something similar to New Gods?
Yeah, I mean, I think superhero comics in general, to my mind, are contemporary modern day mythology. I think this is how the great mythologies were written in their time, not by one person, by many people coming in, adding bits and pieces, tales gathered from 100 different sources. And so, yeah, I feel like the endeavor is to stay true to that idea, and embrace the idea of this being a mythological story more than a sort of straight up action conflict drama story, in some ways, and also embrace all the contradictions. Like great world mythologies are completely full of contradictions and conflicting stories, and one of them portray a character as good, the other one portrays the same character as evil, and I think there is a joy to try to contain all of that within a story. And so we've always seen Highfather as this lovely, benevolent, godlike character, but he also chose to sacrifice his own son. Like, who does that, right? And I think I think within that lies the ability to do good mythology. Like none of the mythological characters are binaries; they're all complex. No one's good or bad. No one's god or devil. They're all characters on different side of a fence. And yes, there are stories to be taken by us mortal readers from these things, but they're usually cautionary tales and not tales of idealism, if you will.
I fully agree with that. I think that's such a interesting aspect, bringing up the idea of the contradictions, because so much of mythology is ultimately us how we interpret and see these larger than life characters, and that changes so much across not only generations but also
Yeah,
locations and regions.
yeah, I agree. I agree. I think that's also part of my endeavor is to bring that sort of mythological feel from across different cultures and parts of the world. Like these are not just gods inspired by Greco-Roman mythology. These are there will be gods inspired by Hindu mythology, gods inspired by other parts of Asia. We might see gods from other cultures, Persia, African myths. So yeah, I feel like um, that is very much the endeavor to make it feel like it belongs to the world.
Which is very exciting because previously, so many of the gods that we've seen in the fourth world have been strictly New Genesis or Apocalypse. The fact that all that we know is that the old gods died, and we don't know what other new ones are out there.
Yeah, I suspect there are way more than we've seen. Essentially, all we've seen is a city on a whole planet. Um, and even amongst that within that city we've only been familiar with maybe 5, 10 of these characters, and I feel like yeah, why aren't there gods strewn throughout the rest of the galaxy, and I feel like we'll see some of those come into play as well.
So, what was kind of the process about that with creating these new characters and worlds?
I mean, I don't really have a process. I just create them because they bring me joy. I find a place for a character. I feel like there's a role to be played. I think of a story part, and I ask myself, great, what kind of fun character do I want here? And I feel like you build depth and nuance over time as you tell these stories. You don't try to formulate them in the beginning. Um, so yeah, some of the gods are going to be have depth and have their own histories and pasts, and we'll see them play small or big roles. And then there are other gods that are just there because they're absurd and cool. Like there's a god of speaking to mother boxes who's just mouths everywhere, and his name is Mother Speaker. So yeah.
God, that sounds so cool. I'm very excited about that. But yeah,
Yeah,
I
I mean,
think
I feel like that's the essence of comics, right?
yeah, because you can really do anything. It's a visual freeing medium, and that very
Yeah,
much
yeah, absolutely.
yeah, that very much kind of goes back to that Kirby energy of essentially just going full speed, 100 miles an hour, without really thinking about the quote unquote logic of how all this works.
Yeah, and I feel like that's what I meant by like having that sort of Kirby energy of just spilling your ideas out onto the page. Um, I, I find great joy in doing that. Yeah,
So, prior to writing the series, who was your favorite character, and who has become your new favorite character to write for?
I don't really have favorite characters. I have favorite stories, and honestly, I just love writing good characters, interesting characters. Like I've had fun writing Highfather in the first couple of issues. I've had massive fun writing Scott Free and Barda in the first couple of issues. There are some new characters that I've had a good time writing. Light Ray, I'm setting him up for something cool that comes further down the line. So yeah, I enjoy storytelling. I don't particularly enjoy like a character, in isolation that way.
correct me if I'm wrong, but this is an ongoing series that's already, I don't want to say start, but it's going on for 2 years, right?
Well, I have 3 years worth of story planned, and it's an ongoing series in that we review every year, every 12 issues, whether the book can sustain itself and keep going. So it's an ongoing series. We will hopefully do good numbers for the first 12 issues to keep going.
So, what has been kind of your favorite thing that you've discovered when tackling this world and these characters?
I think just the cast, just having such a wide cast and to be able to call on, like, um, when you're writing detective, right? You pull in these characters that everyone already knows, and they have kind of these solid, rigid shapes. Like you can change some things, but you can't change them drastically. Whereas with New Gods, because it's been such a long time, and there are so many characters ranging from in immensely popular to who's that guy who showed up for like 3 panels on one issue somewhere, and so because nobody else is really doing anything with this property, I get to call on any of those characters and reinvent them and turn them into either important characters or characters that have more depth than you might have considered in the beginning. So that's the part that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, and I think that is such a, in a way, you're not, in a way, you're building upon the mythology and make your own. You're taking that layer of the, you're literally quote unquote taking the source and doing your own thing with it and remixing it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the joy of taking on something like this. Yeah.
Alright, so let's talk a little bit about working with Evan Kegel, who is doing some of the most great work. I loved y'all's run on Dawn Runner, so I got very excited to see him announced as the artist. So, what do you think he brings to the series?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been a long time collaborator with Evan, and I think um, Evan's work is just masterful. He's one of these kind of undiscovered, untapped talents that I think people are going to discover with this book. And he has this innate ability to understand and transmit scale, which I think is very important for when you are making a book like New Gods. I think New Gods as a property is inherently successful because of the sheer scale on which it operates. Um, so yeah, so I think Evan's scale and his understanding of nuance and human expressions and character acting. So while having this kind of magnificent scale, he's able to still make the smaller moments feel more intimate and feel real, if you will. So yeah, it's just a fantastic, fantastic creator. I think people are going to be awed by his work. Yeah.
I have to say, I'm already awed by the preview pages because the way that he presents the space, even how Metrod speaks with the source, is so beautiful. It's so unique and different than what we've seen in
Yeah.
the past. The fact that you literally have like a wheel of these words being spoken to him, I'm just like, wow, that's so cool and so different than what I would see in a quote unquote big two comic.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I would also take a little bit of credit with that because like that has always been my endeavor, whether it was with Swamp Thing or Justice League Dark or any of these things, doing a Library of Babel issue in Justice League Dark or doing those sort of 80s, 90s horror double page spreads in Swamp Thing. I think that has always been the endeavor to do something formalist with that. Um, so we wanted to do our take on that sort of Hickman esque data page thing. But obviously, this being new gods, we thought it would be cool if it felt like a neo-mythic text, like something you might find in a book of magic or the occult somewhere. And so that's kind of the aesthetic we've pulled into this. And yeah, as you said in that preview, the page that you're talking about from Evan is just gorgeous. Like I love the fine details of everything that's drawn around Metron as well.
That's very fascinating that you brought up these books of magic, because I was also thinking about some like House of
Mm.
Leaves as well, which plays so much with the idea of typography, text
Yeah.
within presentation.
Yeah. I think that's something I particularly enjoy is viewing the entirety of the book as art, not just my writing, not just Evan's art, but everything about the book is part of its narrative, is part of its aesthetic.
So, can you talk a little bit about kind of the visual style and feel that you wanted Evan to present to the book?
I mean, I think, like I said, it's all about scale, and about sort of contrasting that scale with the powerful inner conflicts of these characters. So Evan doesn't really need me to give him any visual direction per se. My scripts tend to lean into the idea of Evan doing these visuals that depict scale in some way. You know, um, yeah, why is Highfather powerful? Well, you get to see a man standing in front of a sky with a billion worlds in front of him and one man with a shepherd's staff, and the symbolism of that image that I guide all of these worlds that lay in front of me kind of depicts the scale of that character, if you will. Um, so yeah, things like that, which don't necessarily come in as instructions or me telling Evan something, but I think the key to a good collaboration is to be able to transmit that stuff in the work rather than as instruction.
So, when it comes to the characters, there have been some redesigns, which I really love a lot. Was that more of what had put a new spin on them, or was it more of just of a decision to help set it apart from what came before?
No, I think this is why comics have continued to be a successful medium, through decades. Um, we want to make a comic for 2024. We don't want to make a Kirby homage comic, and so um, I think I love the visual energy and aesthetic of Kirby, but it very much feels like a comic of its time. Um, even though Kirby was amazing, it still feels like comic book art that we've seen. And as readers in 2024, we've all seen Kirby. So I want my aim when making this book is to not give people something they've already seen, but to give something to people that excites them, that they can see how it has evolved to here from what they already know. And I think understanding that is very important, and I think Evan does that magnificently. So his designs are seeking to preserve that sort of Kirby weird energy, um, but also contemporizing, making it feel like now. Like, I'll give you an example. These new gods and their mother boxes. The mother boxes look in their time, I'm sure, looked like inexplicable contraptions that somehow, controlled all of space and time and created matter and machines and whatnot. But now we all have iPhones and we all have smartphones, and suddenly the mother boxes look like clunky steampunk boxes compared to what we have. Um, and I think some of that is important to keep, but it's also important to now redesign them. So if you look at the first appearance of a mother box, it's not a box anymore. It kind of assembles itself from Orion's being and armor to where it looks like almost like a Rubik's cube making itself from pieces of his armor. Um, So yeah, so just doing cool things like that. I think up more to update the aesthetic and make it contemporary and make it feel new rather than pay homage to what Kirby did.
I was about to say it sounds very much like the Lamont configuration from Hellraiser.
Yeah, yeah, kind of, but again, not as boxy.
Yeah,
Uh, it think uh, if if your phone was a tiny transformer.
that's cool. I do love that y'all are preserving that energy in Spirit because there's just something so striking about the original series and the costumes and the worlds and the technology and
Yeah,
the fact that y'all are presenting it in a new way that feels new and modern while not.
yeah. Like I'll give you another example, right? Like sometimes you run into design issues and you're not really, I love Kirby, but I'm not a fan of absolutely everything he did in the source material,
Mhm.
right? So I'm sure the same is true for Evan. And we came across a Black Racer appearance and we went, why is this guy on skis? It feels so weird. Why is he on skis? He's like flying through space and time, and he is death personified, and his vehicle of choice is like slaloming through space. Um, but I think when you do stuff like that, you're also like, yeah, but it's joyful. It's comics. It's weird. It's cool that he's on skis because it's ridiculous that he's on skis. And so when we updated that design for our story, we're not taking away the skis. We're giving you a reason why you might have thought they were skis in the first place. So it's stuff like that. It's even redesign has to make narrative sense. So I think we very much preserve Kirby's energy by going, nope, we're not going to take the skis away, but we also make it our own by going like, yes, this looks like skis, but it's something entirely different.
That's so cool. I again, I love the fact that y'all are not being subtractive but additive with all
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Like I've always seen myself as a yes and kind of writer. So if you throw me a narrative curveball, my response is not to go, no, I don't want to do that. My response is to go, cool, here's how we can do it, and this is what we should do with it. So yeah, very much approaching it in that way.
So was it your decision or was it Evan's decision to do those huge title splashes for the names?
That was originally my decision. I did that first for Orion. Actually, weirdly enough, I did that for Orion and Mr. Miracle both. And I didn't realize I had done that. I just thought the title behind Orion would look great because he's just kind of chunky,
Hmm.
beefy Orion. And so I felt like the title should be kind of solid and blocky like him. And then we did later in the issue, you'll see we've done a kind of circus escape artist poster kind of thing.
Theatrical.
Yeah, for Mr. Miracle. But I hadn't gone like, "Oh, I'm going to do this for every character." It just so happened that I did it for both those characters in issue one. And then I loved the idea so much because I thought to myself, if it's a completely new reader coming to this book and I want them to really remember these characters, what better way than to take their sort of first meaningful appearance and just boom, put their name in the background.
Exactly. There's very much something weirdly, and I mean this positively, manga anime esque about that. The fact that you're almost doing it as like this character introduction in a shonen manga.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. I mean, very much of its time, as I said.
So outside that, you also have colorist Francisco Segala and letterer Ariana Mayer. And I'm kind of curious about how's that been
No,
working for
the
them.
letterer is Tom Napolitano.
Is it? Oh,
Yeah, yeah,
oh, sorry about that, Tom. I guess the website was wrong about that.
yeah. It's Tom Napolitano.
Yeah, which is excited about that because Tom is doing great work, always has. Same with Francisco. And what do they kind of bring to the series as a team?
I mean, Francesco, we got to know his work on Dawnrunner because he did the last two issues of Dawnrunner. And I think it's really challenging to find a colorist who understands how to color an artist. Sometimes, you work with industry greats, and sometimes it's not a right fit because the colorist and the artist have to have that sort of chemistry, if you will. And I feel like, yeah, the first time we worked with Francesco, we felt like there was something there to be able to build and develop that chemistry. And I'm glad to see it bearing fruit with these issues. We still have a few stumbles here and there. We still have to go back and change things, but that's part of the process. And um, I think people are going to be excited to see how this issue looks, even in the colors. And Tom and I worked on Catwoman before, and Tom's always been a fantastic letterer, always willing to try interesting new things. Like, we've got a new God's language that I created in this book, and you'll see it appearing often in the background of some of the panels. And so, doing that, we created a font from that. So doing that in the book is also an interesting design challenge for Tom, and I think he's done really well with it.
Love to hear that. So, before we start wrapping things up, I do have to ask, with kind of all your work, what do you find so interesting about gods and divinity and kind of like these higher beings?
I mean, I don't necessarily find gods in themselves interesting. I find mythology interesting because I think, I might be controversial saying this, but it's true. Human beings create gods because they want to see themselves personified as these kind of as the reason the world exists. The universe revolves around each and every one of us, and I think the fact that societies create these gods, if you will, and tell stories of them is because we are interested in telling stories about ourselves where the stakes are incredibly high without ever having to actually partake in those stakes. And so, because it does that, I feel like good mythological stories are reflective of fundamentally intimate human things that we don't otherwise talk about. If I did a comic about being a first time father, sure, it would be cool, but maybe it doesn't belong at DC. But if I want to do a story about being a first time father in a New Gods book, now that feels epic, and that feels like there is scale to it, and I can really ramp up the drama and conflict. So yeah, I think I enjoy mythology for that reason. It lets me reflect humanity in this kind of grandiose, punchy, big way.
Yeah, and I fully agree with that because it's very much these archetypes are personified on this huge scale of a way of us interpreting our interactions, life, emotions, and place in
Yeah,
the universe.
yeah, I agree.
So, Rob, how can people follow you, keep up with you, and how can they support New Gods?
Well, you can support New Gods by pre-ordering issue 3 now. Issue 1 and 2 have already gone through FOC. Um, you can still call your retailer and bug them to up their orders, which they can all the way up until the book comes out. Um, and yeah, you can follow me on Twitter, but and Blue Sky. Twitter, I'm not sure how long I continue to be there for. Honestly, if things go well, I was hoping to actually just start a newsletter and have a Discord, but take myself off of most social media. So yeah, stay in touch. If you'd like to subscribe to my newsletter, it's flybysoul.com.
Great. Rob, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate taking the time.
Thank you, Brent. I appreciate it.